Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Virginia Trioli. Tonight we're bringing you a special collaboration with the Melbourne Writers' Festival, which is now underway and can be streamed online. The theme this year is a question we're all wondering. Tell me how it ends. Joining me on the panel to figure that out, writer and filmmaker John Safran, lawyer and former Liberal and Independent MP Julia Banks. Joining us via Skype, Barrister Rachel Doyle, and she'll join us in a moment. ABC News presenter and former AFL player Tony Armstrong, and actor, writer and director Virginia Gay, who's going to close the show this evening with a special performance from her recent production Cyrano, which was cancelled just hours before opening night. It's great to have you all here. Thank you for coming. Rachel will be joining us a little later as well, and also a little later we'll be joined live by rock star Greek economist Yanis Varoufakis. He has a close connection with Australia. His daughter's doing her HSC here, and he has some bold ideas about our future.
Did the Prime Minister set the wrong example by applying for the exemption that allowed him to fly home to his family for Father's Day at the taxpayer's expense?
All right, let's go to the big question of the day, Virginia Gay.
You've told me very specifically that I'm not allowed to use any big swear words.
Neither of you are allowed to swear. You're all sweary and no one's allowed to swear.
But if any story was going to get those big bad words out of me, it is this nonsense. Honestly, the idea that there is one rule for us and one rule for him, I cannot stand it. And in my industry particularly, we move about a lot. We have short-term contracts. I've got a lot of friends who are stranded on one side of a border. They can't get home. They can't get back into the state where they are residents. They are paying 2 rents and their shows have been cancelled. And this guy thinks that he doesn't have to play by those rules. And I am furious about it.
We'll clarify that there were rules in place and he played by the rules that allowed him to travel. I think it's a fair point to make. He applied for the permit and got it. Tony?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think on that, really strong leadership can be not necessarily doing what you can do, but setting a really good moral standpoint and doing the right thing, given there are so many people around Australia wanting to go home and visit their mum, their dad, their kids, their cousins, all of those kind of things. I think he had a great opportunity to set a great example, and I think if he had his time again, he might have done it differently. Julia Banks?
I'm going to exercise the same restraint as Virginia. I have to say there are rules and there are entitlements, and I notice Scott Morrison came out yesterday saying that, you know, he it was by the rules and this is a cheap shot that everyone's in. He just wanted to see his kids. Well, there's rules and entitlement and then there's judgment. And it was absolutely, totally, utterly appalling judgment to not only go and break effectively the restrictions that every other Australian, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, is under. When you've got and to say, well, I need to see my wife and children, you know, forgive me, and let's not talk about it because it's about my family. When there are Australians who can't see their who couldn't see their father on Father's Day, who might be dying, or, you know, they haven't seen them forever, and yet he gets on the VIP jet, which costs, apparently, I'm told, the cost of the trip was, you know, up to $30,000. He would need security, he would need detail, he would need staff, he would, and to go to his taxpayer-funded Kirribilli house, which is, you know, not to the home that is provided for the Prime Minister in Canberra, for the Prime Minister and his family. When, you know, so there's rules and there's judgment.
Well, intriguingly, the Leader of the Opposition, Anthony Albanese, declined to criticise him. It was interesting to see Nikki Savva's column in the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald today. Yeah. She wrote that, that the Prime Minister, if you like, contacted him and secured his support, the agreement that, you know, we don't go low, we don't attack each other's families.
I read that, and again, this is this duopoly of power that is happening with our major parties. It's sort of, it's not going low to say that, you know, you shouldn't have spent all that money and, you know, thought one rule for everyone else, that I'm special, I'm the Prime Minister. You know, in my many, many years of crisis and risk management, the one rule for a CEO, if their organisation is under crisis, is to show up and to be there and to experience what everyone, the employee group, be that the employee group, for which they're responsible, or their teams to be there with them. But you know, I think someone dubbed this Hawaii 2.0. You know, Scott Morrison was not there during the bushfire crisis, and he was not there basically where he should have been.
Rachel Doyle is with us now via Skype. Great to have you, Rachel. The question was about whether the Prime Minister showed a wrong example by applying for the exemption and getting it to go and see his children on Father's Day. Your view?
Look, I suppose I'm on this show wearing three hats, as a lawyer, a writer and a person. As a lawyer, I'd have to do a lot of tedious research in order to offer any considered view about whether any particular rule or exception was capable of operating the way the Prime Minister says. So I'm not going to take on a brief like that out of hours. As a writer...
and we're not paying. So.
No, it's not a pro bono brief I'm going to take on tonight. As a writer... a tale of there being two standards, one rule for many and another for an individual, is probably a story that's too dull, almost too predictable for me to want to write about. And as a person, I doubt that anyone's particularly interested in my contribution to the debate. But in particular, as a person living in Melbourne who's endured now over 200 days of lockdown, it's probably the case that my personal view is something that's not fit for broadcast.
And we've had a number of those so far. John Safran, are you adding to that?
No, our Prime Minister is going to have to try a lot harder to excite me about breaking lockdown, because I live in Balaclava, Melbourne, and around the corner from me 2 nights ago, there's this synagogue called Indepth, and they're the ones with like the biggest and furriest of hats and the longest of side locks. And congregants,
they're very specific, very, very small, ultra-Orthodox Jewish group. And,
yeah. And they locked themselves in the synagogue, and there was all these police cars everywhere. So, like, we were all down there kind of watching it all. And there were, like, police cars, like, parked in laneways, and there was the side lock kids screaming at the police. And then I look up, and above, like, this shopping strip where the synagogue is, I just see like this little like skull-capped little head kind of like running, and they're up on the rooftop kind of surveying down, seeing where the police were and seeing where they could break out. So
are you saying that's a bust out of lockdown? You're saying not
yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's hard to get me excited that like he just like crossed the border to visit his family.
Okay, no, we probably can't top that.
Good evening, panel. My question to you tonight is: it seems like the lines between PR and journalism are becoming increasingly blurred, particularly when it comes to political reporting. How do we make sure that we're holding these media outlets to account for their journalistic standards and the words that they share?
Let's start with you, John Safran, because in a sense we can talk about the breathtakingly dark arts of PR that you've uncovered in your book. Tell us a little bit about that.
My book, I looked into Philip Morris, who were claiming that they're the Marlboro people, and they were claiming that they were shutting down as a cigarette company, and they were going to relaunch as a health enterprise, and they were going to try to get the 1 billion smokers, including their own customers, off cigarettes. And so at first I thought, like maybe this is like the fall of the Berlin Wall or the end of apartheid or something, and it's actually going to happen. And then I snooped around a bit, and you wouldn't believe it. You can't take the makers of Marlboro cigarettes on face value. And what they were doing is the reason they were doing this is because in Europe, the European Parliament banned menthol cigarettes all across Europe last year. So you can't make them, you can't sell them, and it was going to be the first step of like banning all cigarettes across Europe. So Philip Morris, it was the beginning of the end. And so they came up with this strategy of we're going to introduce this new product, and it's not a cigarette, it's a heat stick. And then I've actually got it. I think I got it.
Ah, you've got it. It's got a funny name. It's called an IQOS or
How
something.
do I not have this?
Is it at the back?
That was like the one thing I had to bring. Anyway, it's you look at the
You shove the cigarette into this stick and it heats up the tobacco.
But you look at this thing that they're saying isn't a cigarette, is a heat stick, and it's tobacco rolled in paper with a filter at one end that you plant between your lips, inhaling nicotine and tobacco into your lungs.
That's a cigarette.
And it's like, and you say, well, why is that not a cigarette? And they say, oh, because it's a heat stick.
And because it doesn't burn.
Yeah, they've got their own little things around the edges that claim it's not a cigarette, and but it worked. So over Europe now, you cannot buy menthol cigarettes, but you can buy menthol tobacco rolled in paper with a filter at one end that you plant between your lips, inhaling tobacco and nicotine into your lungs. And and it just worked. I couldn't believe it. So it just goes to show how you've got to be on your toes. But, and I guess if you're talking about reporting, no one reported on this because it seems like a really un-zeitgeist issue, the whole thing about cigarettes. It seems like a 1970s issue, and it's like, John, if you're going to report on it, you should grow sideburns and wear like flares or whatever, because what an out-of-date issue. And so that's why I think lots of the media didn't cover it. But if you've got like cells growing in your body, like taking over, giving you cancer, like it's very zeitgeist for that, very zeitgeist for the health system. And still in 2021, 52 million people die of everything all over the world. 8 million of those are cigarette related. So it couldn't be more zeitgeist, but like journalists dropped the ball, except for... just because it didn't seem like it's kind of a cool, topical kind of thing. It seemed like a dated thing.
Let me go to you, Tony, because this question really is perfect for the incredibly media-managed world of sport as well, where politeness or playing the game is access. And crossing that line means, you know, the end of access, and access is everything in that particular world. How do you respond to the question?
Oh, it's an interesting one. I think sport... Well, actually, I've got an interesting take on this, especially around Indigenous players. Clearly, being a former one, not a former Indigenous person, still am, can confirm, former player. Even some of the words that are used around describing Indigenous players. So, a player will be magical, freakish. You know, it's unbelievable the way that Indepth kicked that goal. It's uncanny. It's like. What we're actually doing there, very, very subtly, is we're discounting the 10,000 hours of mastery. We're very subtly getting into the general discourse that Eddie Betts, through no training, could just picked up a ball and magically can kick a goal from anywhere. No, we're discounting that. And then when you talk about the way a lot of, I guess, non-Indigenous players are reported on, it's hardworking, you know, tough, reliable, courageous. So even words like that can very quickly change the way a conversation goes. And then when you talk about access, it's quite funny. We beg for players to be themselves, and then the second they are themselves, we're like, oh no, he's showing too much personality. He's just got to, you know, 1 week at a time. It's all that kind of stuff. So it's a very interesting world, the sports reporting world, yeah.
Where do you see the dark world of PR, Virginia, intruding into the kind of reporting you want to see?
Well, I think that the extraordinary thing about words generally is, of course, that it's our main form of communication, but it's also our primary means of obfuscation. Like they can work for good and evil, right? And
they do both very well.
They really do. And if you have somebody who's in a position of power who is not a good person but is great with words, then you're in the beginning of a nightmarish hellscape. Like, that's the beginning of a dystopian future. But I think there is also an extraordinary capacity for words, particularly at this moment when we're so isolated, for words to carry extraordinary messages of hope, for words to actually make us feel incredibly connected when we can't be literally connected. So I'm not throwing words out, Virginia. I think that's my final take on that.
Yeah,
I'm pro-words.
I think that's a pretty fairly good take.
Yeah, pro-words if carefully used. Yeah.
My question is for Tony Armstrong. After Taylor Walker was banned from the AFL for his racist remark to Robbie Young, I noticed an article written by a non-Indigenous journalist stating that casting him aside from the game would set back the League's fight against racial vilification. I would love to hear your opinion on what you believe is the right outcome for Walker, and if it's frustrating when non-Indigenous voices are deciding what is an appropriate response for a person who's used a racial slur.
Tony.
That's a great question. Yeah, look, I think I've spoken about Tex before, so I won't actually speak about him itself. I think one of the big issues we've got here is that Indigenous players make up, I would say, 10.5%, 11% of the AFL and the AFLW. But then when you start going up into positions of structural power, so we start talking about coaching, we start talking about people on the boards, we start talking about people in their AFL house, that number very, very quickly diminishes. So when it comes to people making those decisions, well, we simply don't have people in the tent. And it's very, very important that we do get people in the tent who are then making those decisions. So Tanya Hosh is doing an amazing job at the AFL, but at the moment it's really, really hard for her because at the AFL executive level, she's by herself. We haven't had an Indigenous head coach across all the clubs ever, which is a complete blight on the game. We talk about, making these decisions and having non-Indigenous people making those decisions. It's simply because we don't have Indigenous people in the tent making them, which is really, really frustrating. And it's not like there's not the cattle out there. It's not like there aren't people who are clever enough, articulate enough, smart enough, brave enough to be there making those decisions. It's just, I don't think we've put the time into fostering that talent and giving people a leg up. You've got to give people a chance. It's the same in the media. Like, we talk about words and we talk about the media, the way so many of these things are reported on. Like, the reason why my phone always rings is because I'm like the only one, basically. It's like someone else, like give a number of the people who are clearly good enough a chance.
You and Brooke Boney, during NAIDOC week, your phones just must ring off the hook.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe it. I actually exist for 51 other weeks. Did you know that?
Don't go telling us that.
No, sorry, guys.
I'm almost reluctant to come to you with I know it was a question for you, and that's great. It was a good question. But I'm almost reluctant to do that because it must get so exhausting sitting there going, oh, here comes the Indigenous controversy. Here comes the question again. I'm going to have to stand up for the whole damn lot. Yeah, well, it's good. I powered New South Wales with my phone last NAIDOC week. It was unbelievable. Yeah, but like that. But I guess the flip side to that is Brooke Boney, myself, Narelda Jacobs, whoever else is in the media. We've got a responsibility because if we don't do it, then it's white people talking about these issues. Which is Julia, I just want to quickly come to you because I know you spoke about discrimination in your maiden speech to Parliament. It's a different experience, of course, to that Tony describes, but you've got a connection to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm of migrant Greek heritage, and indeed I experienced it from a very young age when, my mum's Australian born and we had a very Aussie upbringing, so to speak. But by virtue of my family name and my looks, I remember a young boy in the playground saying, well, go back home, go where you came from. And I was just absolutely staggered as a child because I just thought, well, this is my home. Like, I don't know any other home.
You had to go home and look up the word, I think.
Yeah, I went home to look up the word and it said a person from a foreign land, and it just did not make sense to my childhood mind. And I think it's basically that if anything makes you feel conspicuous, and unfortunately, to pick up on Tony's point about the power positions where decisions are made, unless and until we get diverse diversity on these leadership decision-making bodies, not just in our parliament but everywhere, our culture will continue to. Yeah.
The parallel here is critical mass that you need, whether it be women in Parliament or critical mass of Indigenous voices, and that's the only way that you ever get change.
I used vaping during my first COVID shutdown in March 2020 to finally give up cigarettes after 43 years of trying and failing by every other method. I don't vape huge amounts of smoke. My lungs feel better, I feel healthier, and my smoking cough is gone. After a lot of search online, I found that there are just 10 telehealth doctors registered to give prescriptions to over 600,000 current vapers. So my question is, why am I going to be forced to become either a criminal or go back to cigarettes because the bureaucratic system's created a monster that doesn't have the logistical capacity in place to scale when we hit ground zero?
John, we'll go to you on that one.
Oh, man, so many things he brings up. Well, first of all, he's going to get away with it, like because the government can ban vapes from overseas, but it's like saying, oh, we're going to ban lipstick. It's like, yeah, well, what actually are you going to do? Like, how are you going to stop it? And that's
someone will find a way to bring it in.
Well, someone who I spoke to a guy who runs the biggest vape empire in Australasia today before coming on, and that's what he said to me. He said when this October 1st happens, where everyone's going, oh my God, vaping's going to be banned, he's saying, what are they going to do? It really is like saying you're going to ban lipstick, and it's like, how can you follow through on that? And I guess when it comes to it being whether vaping is a health device or a health danger, that's where it gets like really confusing. So because the thing that kills you in a cigarette is that it contains tobacco. Tobacco generates tar. That's the tar kills you. Whilst in a vape, there's no tobacco leaf, so it doesn't generate tar. So therefore, vaping people can say the most dangerous thing in a cigarette isn't in a vape. But then it becomes, well, you're still inhaling other things like propylene glycerol and nicotine and flavourings, and then it becomes, well, will there be other really bad health consequences because of that? So that's where it becomes really tricky in deciding.
We were talking about language and the uses and trickery of language before. Is that another example where the language and the words and the description used has been equally as obfuscating, where it's actually been very clever in what it's hidden and what it's tried to promote with vaping?
Yeah, and particularly Philip Morris, because what we were talking about before, which isn't a vape, it's a heat stick, it's a cigarette. But the way you heat it up is you stick it into this device, and that plugs into a wall. So Philip Morris can say it's an e-cigarette, even though it's totally different to a vape, because a vape you also plug into a wall, and you can say is an e-cigarette. So sometimes, for instance, the British National Health Service, they came out in favour of vaping, and they said, oh, we think e-cigarettes can help you get off cigarettes. And Philip Morris would go, look, all this good news about e-cigarettes. Except the National Health Service made it really clear that when they were talking about e-cigarettes, they were talking about vaping. They weren't talking about this cigarette that you plug in a wall from Philip Morris.
Yanis is back with us. Yanis, if you missed the question, it was a question about vaping. A man who's actually used vaping, he says, to successfully stop smoking, and he'd like to be able to continue doing it. I know you've got a particularly personal struggle with vaping. Not yourself, of course.
Don't let my daughter hear you.
Too late, she's watching.
I'm not so sure. She usually avoids shows in which I feature. Look, if vaping was something that was started by some small cooperative in association with the Australian Medical Association or some body of experts, I would be interested to hear what they have to offer the world. But when the tobacco industry is behind that, it's clear what's going on. What we have is a situation where, once Philip Morris hit a wall of resistance from our democracies, then they moved on to the labyrinth of deception. They are finding other ways of doing damage to people's health in order to profit from it. Until vaping becomes a small business, health industry associated enterprise, I'm really not going to look at them as anything other than a threat to young people and older people, for that matter.
Have you managed to dissuade your daughter from vaping? Is she listening to her father, Yanis?
How do I know? How do I know? How does any parent know? In theory, yes.
Just quickly from Rachel Doyle, if anything you'd like to add there from a legal perspective?
Oh, look, I think in John's book, he makes the point very well that Philip Morris have been very clever here in shape-shifting. Their devices are heat sticks when they shouldn't be cigarettes. They're an e-cigarette when that's what they need to be. They're a vapor when they need to be that. And it's the ingenuity that they've shown in working around the law. And when I was reading that part of John's book, I was reminded, of course, of another occasion on which tobacco companies have helped us learn new terminology. British American Tobacco, of course, are famous because of some litigation in Victoria decades ago that concerned their document retention policy, which was a euphemism, of course, for a decision made over a number of years to destroy documents that had been warehoused between rounds of litigation. So it's not the first time that a tobacco company has helped invent new language. And in one sense, it's inevitable. When laws are very finely written, someone will always want to work around them. On the other hand, it's enormously frustrating when the subject matter here pertains to people's health. And what you want is clarity, and you want the substance to be adhered to rather than people escaping by dint of inventing new words.
Just very quickly, John.
If you want to know how brilliant Philip Morris are with words, is because tar is the thing that kills you in a cigarette, this new heat stick doesn't contain tar. Mm-hmm. And that's because they've changed the word to tar to nicotine-free dry particulate matter. And just think of how brilliant that is.
Works for me, John.
And how audacious that is, that a cigarette is the most infamous nicotine product in the world, and they've come up with a new word for tar that contains the expression nicotine-free, so they've isolated the bit of the cigarette that doesn't contain nicotine and said, oh, that bit's nicotine-free, and now they can talk about the heat stick and throw in the term nicotine-free.
It's wonderful. I don't know what Orwell would make of any of this. Tonight was meant to be the closing night of Cyrano, a play that was written, rehearsed and cancelled in lockdown. Here's the wonderful Virginia Gay with a monologue that no one has yet had the chance to see.
I want to take you to every restaurant in the city, every single one. And we'll say to the waiters, just bring us what you think the best food is. No, don't tell us, just bring it to us. I want to take you to a museum in Amsterdam. I want to kiss your neck amongst the Rembrandts, the marble that looks like flesh. How did they do that? Butterflies in stone with transparent wings. Let's go to a cabin in the woods together. Can it be a log cabin? It has to be a log cabin, right? Let's get very rich and own a log cabin. Let's own several and give them away to friends. And also, let's never get rich. Let's always work and know the worth of our work. Let's get our hands dirty and sleep well at night. Hey, do you snore? I mean, I guess we'll find out. Let's have a garden. Yeah. Let's have a garden with a big old table out the back, and we'll throw a sheet over it and we'll serve up lamb we cooked for hours, except you're a vegetarian, you told me that. We'll serve up eggplant we cooked for hours. And then we'll invite everybody over and they'll drink wine and laugh, and none of them will leave, and at 3 a.m. we'll reluctantly call some of them cabs, and the rest of them will wedge about the house, a sofa here, window seat there, little corner of the kids' room, sweep the Lego out of the way with a foot, roll them in, covered in coats because we've run out of blankets. Kids, I did say kids just then, didn't I? Look, maybe we could talk about this later. It's just I'm on national television at the moment, but yeah, kids. Okay. Let's go and see bad comedy in a back room in the East Village. Let's get lost in a Turkish spice market and come out with our skin dry rubbed with clove and cinnamon. Let's drink 50-cent mimosas in Cuba on days so hot we can't sit down. The seats will scald the back of our legs. And then let's get headaches from the day drinking and have to go to bed in the afternoon and listen to the world pootling on outside our window. Car horns, shouts of people, a hammer drill, smell of someone pressing waffle cones, gasoline, jasmine. The mess and the fuss of living